the 2nd of May, 2022. Hi! So today's the 2nd of May, 2022, as I show the calendar from the notebook for the date, okay? Because those who know, you can only order a calendar in advance so often, so many months beforehand to the new year. I don't know why that is. I don't, but that is as it is. Anyway, so thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like this official YouTube video and share my official YouTube video link, and go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com. So, I am going to make a pop culture reference. Give this warning, okay? It's kind of a little bit drawn out, pun intended, okay? You'll get that particular sarcastic comment as I get to the pop culture reference, okay? But because those of you who have listened and watched my official YouTube videos and or know me in person, face-to-face in person, and discuss things with me in person, face-to-face in person, you know that I can kind of it's not that I get lost in the weeds, it's kind of similar to sermons in some ways, and I am an ordained reverend and a confirmed member of Presbyterian Church USA and Old Town Presbyterian Church. So, okay. So, at a whole bunch of events, you know what? I'm going to start off with, I have a favorite reference for this, okay? And in this minimal hint I will give you, okay, even though it's a lecture, in comparison to discussions, in this particular reference, you know, I grew up with this saying. My biological father told me that crying is a weakness, okay? So, this is a pop culture reference, okay? So, I wound up in Washington State after all sorts of situations. In the year of 2013, you know, after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, where I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain, and I was in a coma for a while. I deal with headaches and migraines, and memory deficits and cognitive disorders, and I went from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math. And that subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain took about 8.5 years to fully dissipate out of the view of the MRI and CAT scans. And so, after waking up in the state of Texas, some stuff happened. I had, at some point in time in the year of 2009, I earned 26 scuba diving certifications. I had handled a bunch of stuff, did what I could to make sure that my son, who was born in the year of 2000, just a little over a year after waking up from my coma, and my daughter's birth in the year of 2002, just a little over 2 years after waking up from my coma, but still having had the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain when I had delivered each one of them those years. Anyway, did the best I could for my son and my daughter, as well as myself, and in the year 2009, I earned 26 scuba diving certifications, landed at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, landed at the bottom of the Atlantic area of the ocean, but I grew up in the area I was born and raised in, which is New Jersey, and that Atlantic area coastline when the summertime for the most part, but also New York City, New York State, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, stuff like that, just fairly normal for me. Regarding how the way I was as a child and a teenager about education regarding learning. And so in the year 2011, I had begun the Dominant Mentor program, and I graduated that year. And so the electives would be the example in reference to my scuba diving. There was a point in time when I had dated and then became engaged to this guy. And so I met him at the NTV in Carrollton, Texas. And for about a year and a half, I'd take whichever car I had, because I had 2 cars, and I was right down the street and got the cars taken, the oil changes and stuff, for my white Kia Sedona van and my, what I call Zippy, my little Bumblebee car, a VW Beetle, yellow on the outside with, black convertible top and leather interior, turbo engine. And I can make a couple references to that particular aspect. So, my little Bumblebee car, my little Zippy. Anyway, at NTV, I was asked by this guy, who later I became engaged to twice to. He had asked me what I was doing for the weekend. And I had said, oh, I'm going to a wedding. And he said, oh. And now I've told people about this particular wedding multiple times up to this point. And that includes scuba divers in different areas, which includes Clear Spring Scuba Park, and it also includes Huntsville Quarry. It includes Lake Travis as well. For the clarification. It's important, okay? Get to the reasons why. And so, talked with this guy in NTV after having talked about it over and over, and because what I was going to do that weekend was attend someone's wedding as an event in comparison to the only wedding I had been to since I woke up from my coma, which had to do with my biological sister and how she had gotten engaged to a guy and their arrogance and haughtiness of how important they thought of themselves as a halfway point between San Marcos, Texas and Carrollton, Texas for me to meet her then fiance before they got married was exit 200 and where the Starbucks is on the other side of the Prime Outlets and in San Marcos. For those who know those particular individuals, and if they have their own experiences where that would be considered as a metaphor, where those people said that it was a halfway point from San Marcos to Carrollton, Texas at exit 200 at that particular coffee shop, you could take that in consideration, and if in that reference, those particular people didn't think about how that's not a halfway point, they can go and psychologically evaluate their own friendships and what have yous over the years and decades and see where they have been exactly the same in that reference. And, that privilege that they've had for however long, and how some people just, are as they are. And so I traveled, 300 miles. That's what they thought was a halfway point from San Marcos to Carrollton, Texas. Wherever they were in San Marcos, Texas to exit 200 on I-35 compared to Carrollton, Texas to that exit. And so I told this to this guy, and we did become engaged twice, but this would be shortly before the first engagement. Had known each other through this location for about a year and a half. And because he had asked me if I needed a date, or if I had a date or something like that, I was like, why? Because the only experience I had was where my son and my daughter were the ring bearer and the flower girl. And then I dealt with my biological sister, the same Patricia Ann Miller that was surprised as far as what halfway means in reality compared to their wishes and privilege type, but there's no privilege there in regards of. And so, especially when it comes to earning things. And so, personal opinion, you actually have to earn things, because that's how the viewpoint is. Anyway, so I informed this guy, I actually had to deal with my biological sister being insulted that I would drive my son and my daughter from Carrollton, Texas to Austin, Texas, had a gown to wear that was within the respect of the wedding, although I'm going to guesstimate because it was a floor-length gown and a light lavender with spaghetti straps, but a sheer shawl and a empire waist A-line cut that, lavender that my biological sister had been upset because somebody might think that I was a part of the bridal party, because who else would I know at that abomination of a wedding, in my opinion, other than my son and my daughter. And so those people, they had their opinion as far as those particular factors. And so I talked about this. And when I say that, I actually am saying I talked about this from the time frame within a week, because anybody who's known me, certain things I could keep quiet about. Other things, no. So from that point in time, I was fairly certain I was involved with scuba diving. So the first scuba diving certification class, and or when volunteering, I went and talked about all that, because anybody who's dealt with certain stuff like that. And I was born and raised in New Jersey in the 1980s and 1990s. So anybody who's ever met someone who was born and raised in New Jersey in the 1980s and 1990s, here's an example. You know how people have complained about 45 in the 2015 and 2016 election cycle for his words? He was so filtered compared to the stuff that I had to say for that particular difference of a reference. just for clarification, this is why I didn't understand. Why would anybody be upset by his words? I mean, they knew he was in New York City and worked in construction. I mean, sure, okay, fine, he has whatever hotels, fine. I'm sure he can do both. That's probably why he has both. So hypothetically, he could probably, because of his businesses and stuff, maybe, just maybe, he knows how to get his elbows dirty at the same time of being pristine with words. Surprise! Whatever people's stereotype views as far as what people are from the tri-state area, good morning. And so, it's just the 2nd of May in 2022, that's all. So, I had stuff to say. So in that reference of 45, when he was on the election trail, as far as the different rallies and the people who complained about it, well, what happened in the media? And then how quickly did he say something at a rally? In that reference to that proverbial metaphor, this happened in Austin. I went back to Carrollton, Texas. Whether you take in regards of the Starbucks at exit 200, unlike 45 though, I wasn't on national television at the time. This is hypothetically part of why I can look at, and more so listen, and just know, I know I've said other stuff that was, I can't be the only one. And so, I'm going to get to that pop culture. I'm going to get to that pop culture in a little bit. So, make sure to like this official YouTube video and subscribe to my official YouTube channel and go to my website, www.susanieling.com. So, just after that situation regarding the Starbucks, I go back to the DFW area. Okay, let me give you a small amount of individuals that I had talked about that situation to. So there's scuba divers for a starting point, okay? Then there's my ex-in-laws, and then the neighborhood in Fort Worth as to whoever could possibly hear me when I was outside smoking. In the area, in either one, okay? So I was just born and raised in New Jersey, going up to the 5 boroughs in New York City in the 1980s and 1990s. That's all. Whoever could have possibly heard me far as however many people. Oh, and I was also in the lifestyle, the supposed to be consenting adult lifestyle at the time. And so I was in the smoking section wherever I was for certain events in the DFW area. So maybe, there were people in the nearby vicinity, other than those who I was speaking with, who could have possibly heard me. I don't know. I don't hear my own voice when I talk or lecture. I have to actually, if I want to hear what I sound as, I actually have to play back the recording in comparison. So, maybe that's the difference between when you speak truth. I don't know, I haven't even really thought about that, but as a quick little whatever, as my thoughts go, maybe because I can't hear my own voice when I speak, maybe people who can hear themselves speak, it's whatever, because singing is different. I was taught how to listen to myself when singing, as well as others, because of the way Mrs. Sauer at Old Tenet Presbyterian Church had taught joyful noise. But that was for singing. That wasn't for speaking. So maybe it has to do with that. As far as that truth, when you actually, or, only if you, there are a few times where I can hear myself. It's usually when I stutter a bit, and it's like, because my thoughts are going so fast, so that's the only time I can actually hear myself when I'm speaking. So maybe there was someone in that time frame who's ever heard me when I was upset about something, kind of not really angry, but like frustrated, and maybe in somewhere in the nearby vicinity, in any point in time, taking the reference of that abomination of a wedding between my biological sister, Patricia Ann Miller, because Anna, my biological mother, didn't stop it as far as my biological sister throwing a temper tantrum, stood by my biological sister in comparison in every capacity, didn't see a problem whatsoever, thought it was natural and okay. So there was this argument out in the front yard of wherever that abomination of a wedding was. And so I don't know how a neighborhood in Austin, Texas, where people have about half to 3/4 of an acre in a neighborhood that looks as though it could have a homeowners association, would have the possibility of hearing my biological sister and I argue. I mean, I don't know what type of neighbors that could have seen or heard that, other than, there were the bridesmaids who were there, and that, and Anna, and some of the groomsmen. So there's that. And then whatever types of neighbors, I lived in a homeowners association, so I dealt with certain things. And so, but I don't know how in a society there, with the Austinites that have, about 30 to 40 feet for a front yard, width, maybe 50 feet width, and then maybe about 20 to 30 feet-ish from the porch to the sidewalk, just for the front yard, would be in a neighborhood like 2008 or 2009. Like what type of possibilities of those types of neighbors that would ever pay attention to anything like that. I mean, my hair was a brighter red, that's all. I mean, who would pay attention to that in the Austin area such as that? And, you know, you know. So, anyway, again, having talked about it later, multiple times, including in Austin, at the Lake Travis area, because Lake Travis is in Austin. And so having been at the scuba dive area, anybody who's ever been near water, and talked about it in the daytime and at nighttime. So, I mean, as long as my voice doesn't travel far, then my biological sister and my biological mother and biological father and the Miller family that my biological sister married into don't have anyone that they could think of in those vicinities that could have heard me. At Lake Travis, however big that is. I did go to test to see how far the sound of my voice could travel, but then I realized I had to be in those other areas to be capable to hear. So, the likelihood of someone possibly having heard me at Lake Travis, however big that water is. I don't mean deep. I mean, the surface area of. I am literally realizing this in the year 2022 compared to the year 2009. Because who in the state of Texas goes outside on their back patio? In the summertime. Who does that? And whether or not they're a smoker. What person could have a liveaboard boat in the Lake Travis area or whatever? I don't know. Sure, not at Clear Springs. No. Although there was this situation at Clear Springs where I was asked to assist instructing in a rescue scuba dive course, and I was told to yell, and I had asked if Patty was sure, and instead of, I raised my voice. I didn't technically yell. Though I raised my voice, there were a whole bunch of 911 phone calls. And then, it was as it was. And so, maybe, hypothetically, if someone heard me talk about it with that water nearby, hypothetically. Whether Huntsville, Quarry area, Clear Springs Scuba Park, and Lake Travis would be the most often that would have you. So, in December of 2009, I'm telling who I was going to go on a date with and then later get engaged to and stuff like that. And, he was like, he had been surprised. He was like, what? That's atrocious that that's what you're like, that's what you consider. No. We are biologically related. I don't consider them family in that capacity because, in order to be considered a family, you actually have to care in the correct capacities. And I grew up a certain way. So that sort of stuff is what it is. And he was like, yeah, no, I don't blame you for that. But, as far as the event that evening, I think it was a Friday which obviously he had known about the church, the dance club in the DFW area. And so he had also said he had been to events. And I was like, oh, well then, obviously, that makes sense. I'll acknowledge my Mandarin view on that. Obviously. I can acknowledge, but see, the thing is, though, with dance clubs, there is a certain sort of correlation, whether it's the background music, not necessarily the music itself. So, you could have different genres of music, but certain instruments in the background part of the music can correlate and co-align in reference to if you want to mix up the evenings depending on. So, Midnight Rodeo is actually a good example because they have both country music and I don't want to say Tejano, though it might be as far as, but there are certain instruments, sometimes, you've got drums, that's not usually what I'm referring to for that. However, there's certain sounds that have certain audible aspects. So, I had told them about this. In the NTV, there was like a customer or two, possibly a mechanic was nearby. When we were outside in the smoking area. And for those who don't know, that particular NTV is near a Walmart parking lot. I think there's a Panda Express nearby too. So, again, I looked as I do. Brighter red hair in comparison to the hair color that has been in the current batch that I have purchased, and the volume to actually get my hair taken care of correctly. Instead, I've ordered what I know is the correct number for that to occur, but that hasn't occurred because if it did, I'd actually get my hair color the way I actually prefer it. So, it's how I prefer my hair color. That's how that goes, not the way anybody else prefers. It's my hair. So, anyway, that's the facts. So if I were to actually get what I actually prefer as far as my needs for my hair, because, my body, my choice sort of situations to pay attention to, because it would be considered a violation now, wouldn't it, if I didn't get what I ordered. And since, it's my body, it's my physical body, my choice, those particular aspects of, because what would that be considered to someone who's religious and spiritual? And those capacities on top of that. Those constitutional rights of mine on top of everything else I've already dealt with. To actually get what I actually need for myself, being an ordained reverend and all, having been an ordained reverend for over a decade and a half now. Yeah, having been a confirmed member of the Presbyterian Church USA for over 2 decades now, almost 2.5 decades. Old-time Presbyterian Church aspects, yeah. My body, my choice. Those particular factors of women's rights and civil rights and my freedom of religion. And so, unless there's no religion that has any symbolism in it whatsoever, although I'm fairly certain every religion has symbolism. So, that'd be great, actually. It's only been for the past, since around 2019, of that being an issue, to actually get what I need for myself, for my stuff, instead of other people, because what would that be in those hypothetical references? As far as that constitutional constitutional rights of mine that I actually earned, and you don't have the right to infringe upon especially my religious freedoms. Already gone over that in my books, on my website, www.susanmealing.com. So, yeah, those 10 commandments, that would be considered as you are witnessing my official YouTube video. So, by technicalities, other people needlessly causing problems to my hair, all of those people would be allowing that to occur instead. So that would just be for each and every individual that could ever possibly, because of knowing what I actually need for myself, as far as not only those 10 commandment aspects, though additionally my constitutional rights. And so, just going to throw that out there for people to think about as far as those references. For those who claim that they're woke, because anybody that would claim that they're woke, they wouldn't ever do any violation to a biological female that's a pansexual, half Chinese, half all sorts of other ethnic backgrounds that are all minorities, because I'm not an Anglo-Saxon biological male, by what the woke people talk about. So, but that's only in that hypothetical, right? So anyway, those types of situations, which even in the 2020 election cycle, when I went in the downtown Austin area, and I was dressed in one of my corset outfit things, as far as, and this one female with another female walks up, and they're like, I love your outfit, and then they saw my 45 sign, and oh, you're actually gonna vote for him? Yeah, so much for being woke. Just saying, that's literally the best symbolism in regards to the Democrats in the state of Texas, because it was in the city of Austin. And I look as I do. That an issue. How woke is that? Or is that anti-woke? Because by technicalities, that would be anti-woke. To ever have an issue with somebody's physical appearance, whether male or biological female, and being a pansexual, and having been a beard for decades for multiple individuals in the LGBTQP community, yeah, how anti-woke would that be? In plain sight, in downtown Austin, Texas, in 2020. Isn't it irony about that year of a 2020 vision? Anyway, so I told this guy about that, as far as that abomination of a wedding, and how upset my biological sister was because how dare I wear what I chose to wear, where my legs were covered, and I had a modest gown on, which I actually wore something longer than what she wore, and I also had more modesty than her bridesmaids, as far as those dresses. Yeah, and, just those factors, but who would ever pay attention to that? And then, unless my biological sister didn't complain while she was with those people getting their nails done and their eyebrows done, as long as there was nobody in the vicinity at all, as long as there wasn't any recording devices nearby, as long as, she did it that day, or that week, or that month, or at any point in time, ever, as long as, then, that is as it is. However, there is a point in time that I'm going to get to. 2010, 2011, so 2009. This guy and I, we're talking, and he goes, somebody else. I mean, that would just be common sense. However, just by that situation, you can take a look as to how normal and natural it was for them. So anybody regarding that wedding that didn't notice about that until later, that is how normal that is for those people. Regarding my biological mother, my biological father, and my biological sister, I told this guy this, among others, I would guesstimate they would be in physical pain throughout their entire body if they were forced to actually do what I actually needed instead of their interpretations, their wishes, or what have you. I would guesstimate that they would throw every fit possible to try not to, and each and every time they would just have all sorts of issues, because that's how natural that abomination of a wedding situation was, regarding the way I, as well as my son and my daughter, had been whatever. And I even said the Exit 200 as far as Starbucks, that situation is a normalcy by that time. So it's what I'm accustomed to. Because while my biological mother and biological father would try to use that they moved from New Jersey or Illinois to Texas, they were not asked to. They moved because I refused to move back to Illinois. So anybody they hypothetically tried to get sympathy from, Fort Sam Houston and Medical Hold Unit in the year of 2000 would have those phone records of where I told them I did not want to ever be near them. I was not willing to be a part of that. Again, I had been emancipated, so it's my choice. So while they would be the type that would try to claim that they did all sorts of stuff because they want to try to get sympathy, no different than when in New Jersey, this is what's natural. They have they would be pained to actually have to do things without any input of their own, where it had to be exactly to a T, exactly how not with any involvement of theirs whatsoever, except for doing things correctly as per what not them, I know is best. I understand is best, and I comprehend is best. They would complain, whine, throw tantrums. Literally, my biological mother and biological sister would be like toddlers and fall to the ground crying for no reason other than because they didn't have a choice. And if there was ever a time where if they messed things up or tried another route, they would try crying. This is going to get to this pop culture reference. This is a pop culture reference. I would guesstimate that if the Gutfeld show with Greg Gutfeld specifically, I would guesstimate he could totally envision this. Not saying there aren't other channels or stations and shows. I just, I do like when you scold a toddler, you know, and that sort of thing. Anyway, explain this before this date. And the guy, before we got engaged, of course, he was just, well, it can't be that bad. And I was like, you have no idea what real life is, do you? And he was like, no, I know exactly what real life is. Maybe real life for you. And then there's, you know, other people's lives. And so, you know, that's aw. And he'd even said that he had known what he didn't do it the normal way, as far as what I had dealt with, you know, the people were like, I know how people are from New Jersey, that sort of thing. He had been, I know people from New Jersey. It's like, yeah, sure, which would be irony if he actually knew my biological sister, didn't even realize it. And, you know, the irony of irony in that reference, but it is what it is, because it is what it is. And then, if he did, well then he'd know exactly both sides as to what my son, my daughter, and I dealt with. So anyway, we met up because his thing was, well, you know, I can give you it could be a better time and a better whatever, and it's like, yeah, well, we'll see about that. And he was like, no, you know, it's not, do you really have that low of an expectation of people? Yes, I do. And he was like, that's impossible. No. If you were, and I told him this before going on the date, I told him, if you were to actually know more about my past, you wouldn't be capable to process for a while how I am alive. And he was like, what do you mean? Because if you were to learn about my biological mother and biological father and biological sister as far as what they did just in the state of New Jersey, not forgetting and also remembering Illinois, and in the hypothetical of Texas, you'd wonder why that type of individual would be allowed to exist. And he was like, that can't be that, I promise you. I promise you. And he didn't believe me, which it is what it is. So anyway, one way or another. So fast forward, after 2010 began, and polar bear scuba dive, I was the youngest polar bear scuba diver. And he had actually got to see in a very shortened amount of time as to what I personally dealt with in reference to Clear Spring Scuba Park with each one of my scuba diving certification classes. So whatever he dealt with on land, as far as, you know, the brooding that certain individuals do in the hypothetical, that is what I dealt with on such a minor scale. And especially I earned 26 scuba diving certifications. And so each one of my classes, each time I've been out at the lake or the whatever areas, this is what and he probably didn't even deal with it nearly as bad, because he's a biological male in comparison to me being a biological female. And him, if they had asked who he was with, he would know in that reference, when saying my name, as to that, and whatever they said, whether it was truthful or not, which depending on, there are those factors as well. And so, but the proof is what the proof is. So in those particular references, we got engaged a little bit later, but I had talked about this. So here's where like 2019 through 2021 shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that actually knew me in person, face-to-face in person, from any time of my life, to be honest, but most specifically in the state of Texas from 2000 through 2013. There's nobody who should actually be surprised that actually knew me in person, face-to-face in person, regarding 2019 through 2021, Oh, it is in a different format, yes, though nobody should be surprised in regards to my attempts to clarify, my attempts to assist, and that sort of stuff, though at the exact same time, my right to stand my ground because of certain situations as to the hypotheticals of. Similarly, regarding Clear Springs Scuba Park and my work in comparison, having taken a look at the waters that I worked on, because not that I didn't care to see, those, well, I didn't, it wasn't really one way or another. I did want to have certain what have yous, my check on my water, because I cleared out those waters. That's my work, as far as that's concerned. Checking on the species, as far as the endangered species that, worked on actually elevating so they could be removed from the endangered species list in comparison, as well as the life. So I did a lot of work, and so, just checking on the work. Similarly as to when I was invited to go out to the river, well, I had done some work in the Guadalupe. And so it worked out that I could check on my work. Same thing in reference to, I didn't go into Lake Travis. I'm capable in regards of certain other factors to do some checks. So, all right, is as it is. But nobody should be surprised regarding the 2020 time frame in Austin at all, because of scuba diving and being at Lake Travis and knowing, not remembering the specific address, though knowing. So having driven from Carrollton, Texas to Lake Travis for my scuba diving certifications, if they just so hear, well, hi. Yeah, hi. That's me. And or whatever, not hiding that at all. And so fast forward after having landed at the bottom of the ocean, after the Gulf of Mexico and all that sort of stuff, and having been involved in the lifestyle and spoken about that and all that reference, and then in 2010, after my then fiance had gone off to basic training and having had defended myself in a multitude of situations as well as a few other factors, and what happened as far as Fort Worth Zoo and a few other situations as far as that, and then, because of my house in Carrollton, Texas, and so on and so forth, I had to put that on the market, and as soon as I could actually sell it, because my son and my daughter, I knew that I could always get an apartment. Taking care of a house is much different than what some people think. So the lawn maintenance, I couldn't keep up with that. I needed to do what I could. And while there was it was too much work for me to be capable to make sure I took care of that correctly. I don't like ever owing. And so it's one of those, my memory deficits and cognitive disorders, and after my scuba diving on top of that, I didn't have the luxuries that certain others had, despite having a house in Carrollton. And so then the interior and all that sort of stuff. So I didn't have those luxuries that other people have. Especially with what was going on with my daughter, my son, and I. So while some people may have been surprised I put my house on the market at that point, yeah, well, you know what? If you have common sense, you could see why. Because I also wasn't willing to deal with property management in those particular references as to renting a house out. I had enough I was dealing with, and it was just me. It wasn't I didn't have the luxury that my biological sister had when it came to my biological mother and biological father doing so much, in those capacities, hypothetically to what can be additionally proven. So, why waste my time? There's just no worth to that, obviously. And so in the hypothetical of Mike and Anna being upset about, well, if Patricia had anything to do with it, why would you ever look to me for finances? You should go look at Patricia, although there is that Christmas, which by technicalities, so, you should probably take that check into consideration. But those types of people, because of how they are, but what would they financially actually owe me if they were to actually calculate that? Because of how they are. I mean, just pointing that out there. If they want to do that tally sort of situation, I would guesstimate whatever finances they have as far as their wishful thoughts would be a 10-time difference as to what they actually owe me financially. If they want to do that, just from the time frame of 2003 to now in 2022. So, in a hypothetical, for those who would know that. So that kind of would be that, as far as their financial debts to me would be far greater in the numerical than what they would wish. So literally, if they were to take the numbers that they would try to claim and deduct it from a number that is 5 to 10 times greater, well then they'd know where that would wash out as far as their wishful thoughts and what they'd actually owe. In that hypothetical. Because again, I didn't ask them to move to Texas for me. They have claimed that that was what they said their move was for. I acknowledged that was their claim. I did not ask them, though. There is that difference. If you don't, and anybody who knows how people are from New Jersey in the 1980s and 1990s, you're not doing a favor at that point. That's not a favor, because you actually have to be asked. That was an issue for some types, where if you're not asked, then, but you make a choice, you have that as a choice. If you are asked, and that's, there's the saying, could you do me, would you do me, etc., a favor. If that's not asked, that's not asked. So they don't have that luxury. They haven't ever had that luxury. Because I didn't ask for that favor. So if they tried to convince themselves that they were, well, anybody who knows New Jerseyans from the 1980s and 1990s knows that if you're not specifically asked for in the reference of a favor, and it's specifically worded that way, there's a difference. You have to know certain types of certain things. And so, just for that clarification. So, maybe they could try to say, but most likely, hypothetically, they'd want to pretend to prop themselves up. To try to do that virtue signaling where, oh, look, we did, in comparison, because actions speak louder than words. Sometimes just as loud, depending. And so, in Austin, after, Fort Worth Zoo and all that in the year 2010, in the Austin city area, at each event, each and every event, from 2010 around May or June of 2010, all the way into 2011, whenever the week was that I got a phone call from my biological sister being upset about me having the nerve to actually acknowledge her as my biological sister, what she didn't understand is I was talking about her abomination of a wedding. And what other people in what is supposed to be the consenting adult lifestyle would know whether in San Antonio, DFW, or Austin, I didn't ever actually say any names. So unless you had a business that I could refer someone to you for business, I didn't drop your name. I didn't do that. I wasn't that type of person. Still am not that type of person. Very discreet in that capacity. In those references, though, regarding my biological sister, biological mother, and biological father, that was the terminology I'd use at events. And so, however long it took from the time frame of first moving, because of what occurred, as far as my daughter being hospitalized and doing what I could for my daughter while doing what I could for my son and what I could for our family, as well as what I could muster for myself, people would ask me stuff and I'd go off about that because, well, what experiences do you have to the area of Austin? Well, I got two-ish. I had to drive through Austin regarding San Marcos. It's close and, whatever. And I've driven through a bunch of times, but then the only other experience is in Austin. There's two. One, a set of chandeliers, and I can tell them about that. And then the other situation being the abomination of a wedding that my biological sister and the family she had married into, and how that had been. And so, however long from the time frame of me having attended events in Austin, after moving to the Cedar Park, Round Rock area in 2010, all the way to whenever that phone call occurred regarding my biological sister being upset that I had told someone her name, which realistically, when it occurred, was at an event that month that occurred. A male had, and in the group wherever we were, a male had actually asked me, do you know what? This sounds familiar. Is your biological sister Patricia Hall Miller or whatever? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So by that point in time, well, whenever she had her temper tantrum on the phone, however many people from the DFW area first. Oh, I also went to Atlantis Discovered a few times. In San Antonio, because I liked that store, so I would drive all the way out there for certain things. And so I told those guys in their store with other people around, I don't know what their average customers would be. As far as that would be concerned, and so, and then, other events, like such as 2009 at the Uniform Fetish Ball, and having talked with some people there about that abomination of a wedding before I was pulled on stage, and, against my will and all that stuff, but nonetheless, I did talk about what occurred as far as that abomination of a wedding. And, for those who would ever think that those types of people would ever be civilized, because what would be civil about that if there was any connection in those regards? So, but so if there was any connection in regards of the San Antonio area to those people, well, hey, and I had already done it during time frame at Lake Travis. So by technicalities, by that time, I already had done so. In Austin, I stood my ground. That lake area and whatnot. And then, those different areas. And so still doing so at Lake Travis. You know, how would I know where Lake Travis would be compared to the location of that house? I don't remember where the housing area is. However, I do know that Lake Travis was nearby. And so, you know, so it wasn't as though I hid at all, unlike some people, hypothetically. And so I don't need to mask myself unless I'm going to wear a scuba dive mask for my work in the water. Otherwise, I don't need to wear a mask. You know, I have, but, you know, there are the fashion portion. It literally says fashion mask, just so you know. And so, you know, okay, there you go. In comparison to scuba dive mask, and those references. So, yeah, you know. So, like, maybe there's a metaphor in regards of scuba diving and how I didn't mask that. Those people, whatever, as far as that's concerned. You know, those types that guy I was engaged to, Trace, would know as to how those types had been during January in 2010, as far as that's concerned. But anyway, you know, that type. Nonetheless, from around June of 2010 through whenever that point in time to that phone call, I had been all over the area of Austin, Texas area, including out to Round Rock, good and being honest, in 2010 and 2011, being myself, being honest, after 2009, in regards of my scuba diving at Lake Travis. Yeah, so however many people would know before I ever published my first two books for this reference of finding a silver lining and finding the silver lining, you can go to the book section on my website, www.susanmealing.com. I did put a Dropbox link out there. I guesstimated some people might have had a temper tantrum. So there were people who actually needed assistance, and unlike those types of people who don't ever think that there could ever be anybody that would actually need assistance, because they would be so arrogant and vain to think that they would be whatever and yet wish for sympathy after certain hypotheticals, you know, those problems, hypothetically, you know, reality. And so, you know, those types that don't think about perception in the correct capacities, because if they actually thought about perception in the correct capacities, they would pay attention to the 10 Commandments. Because of technology. I mean, especially in Austin having South by Southwest. Common sense, as far as that's concerned. And so, you know, just pointing that out there. Anyway, it is a coinky dink that South by Southwest has all those what have yous in the Austin area of Texas. So anyway, so I have a pop culture reference, you know, as far as certain things are concerned. And yes, in this particular pop culture reference, my issue, okay, so I grew up where I was raised that crying is a weakness. So seeing this show, the one thing I didn't like was how there was just not any substance to why the particular individual was, you know, realistically, but it was a cartoon, okay? And so, but, you know, I mean, I guess it depends on which way. So, I really like the Sailor Moon cartoon. That was great, or I think it's called Japanimation or whatever, but I like, you know, Sailor Moon and all that. And so my big issue was how, you know, she would cry over stupid stuff. In comparison, I liked Tuxedo Mask and all that stuff. Like, Tuxedo Mask was all, you know, despite a cartoon, whatever, and so, or Japanimation, or whatever, which is an irony because that guy that I was engaged to, Trace, he was half Japanese and I'm half Chinese. So anyway, and he looks so cute in his tuxedo. Anyway, so those situations in a twisted sort of way for this pop culture reference. Anybody who would know my biological sister can see a reference as to the hypothetical when, the difference regarding her tears compared to mine. So if she's had tears as far as real ones, usually it's probably because she got caught. Usually it's because she actually had to deal with the truth and the reality, such as a timeline difference of actual formed memories in the tri-state area. So where her memories as she had formed me was around the year of 1991 time frame at the earliest, to the time frame of 1998 when we moved. So that's a 7 year time frame, maybe 8 at most. I have from 1984 to 1998. So that's a difference by a lot in the tri-state area. This is true. And so, in that time frame, it's, is it 16 years? I think it's 16 years, which is an irony regarding a journal blog, The Ornery PSA. On my website, www.susanneeling.com, if you actually go to that, a picture that I posted, it's page 16. Which is an irony of ironies, because then there's John 3:16, for God so loved the world that gave only begotten Son, that whoso shall ever believe in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. And there is the situation in regards of not only what occurred regarding my daughter, but my son would be an obvious witness to both aspects as to how I did everything I could to remain as calm as I could. And I'm sure when I had given him Finding A and Finding B Silver Lining, he probably didn't really realize, though he would also have the knowledge as to after we wound up in Washington State, how I didn't deny, the emotional aspect because of being honest. I didn't have the capacity to allow that during that time. As far as, being upset as I had the right to be. It is my daughter. However, the facts of, acknowledging and not hiding that. Not using tears the way Anna and Patricia, the way Mike describes as crying is a weakness. Comparison. Though the irony of how many times he fell for them. In comparison. So, while if I cry, which I have, it actually has substance. Because there are reasons. I have had to keep myself together because of everything that I've personally had to deal with. From my childhood, into my teenage years, into being a biological adult. I haven't had the luxury that some people have had, where they could go to like a psychologist and feel better. I'm unlike some people who can go to a church or a synagogue or whatever, and then all of a sudden feel better because they would have you in that capacity. I haven't had that luxury. I can appreciate the services as far as the hymnals. I can appreciate the sermons. I can appreciate the symbolism throughout each aspect. I can fully appreciate that. But what a lot of people go for in those references, in comparison, I do a lot of, and have done a lot of contemplation. So each time, even as a child, I would read through the hymnals. I'd read through the Bible during the services. I'd pay attention to certain factors, and because of, especially in the time frame of the 1980s and 1990s, in New Jersey especially, yeah, there were certain things where having to keep myself in check. Because, well, if you listened and or seen Mike and or Anna and or Patricia, and they're older and they're medicated in comparison to what I've dealt with, I'm no different than I have been, realistically. Yeah, on the recording aspect, I don't use swear words as much, because I know that I have to maintain that. But that's kind of the other part of this pop culture reference. And here's that part that I would guesstimate, the Gutfeld show types would really appreciate this. Okay. So in the state of Texas from 2000 through 2012 especially, it didn't matter which community I've been in. And so throughout this area, as long as my son and my daughter weren't around, because they were, minors, I would just talk. And so I'd use the F word, I'd use the A word, I'd use the S word as far as swearing. So for Anita, it didn't fucking matter what shit I had to say if those assholes had anything to fucking complain about. I didn't give a damn. For an example. So fast forward to this copyright of my saying that I did. Again, that 16-page writing, that picture in my journal blog, the Ornery PSA on my website, www.susanwheeling.com. If in reference to the hypothetical of, my first journal blog and using my saying, and the irony of irony regarding, 45 in 2015 and 2016, and then, whoever didn't see that, I don't know, as far as those who knew me in person, face-to-face in person, that had ever seen my Facebook page and or my FetLife page. To be honest on that, when it comes to writing, as far as books. However, if my saying in regards to what I had said in person, which some of them, instead, they were like, yeah, that's right, you did have a head injury. Yeah. And then, literally, they'd be like, and you didn't graduate basic training. It's like, yeah, kind of. Like, this is what I actually dealt with in the state of Texas. So there were a few times where I had used my saying, and they were like, yeah, you did have a head injury. Palm Sunday. Why do you look like a chicken? And then they were like, we don't look like chickens. Because there were a few times, there were a few of them at the same time, and they were usually biological females. But anyway, so, yeah, you did have a head injury. Yeah, it was in basic training. Yeah, okay, yeah, I know this. I was in basic training when I had it. I remember it. Yeah. That was their response back then. If, however, this pop culture reference in regards of the Sailor Moon cartoon where when she cries, for no real reason, and like she just kind of falls on the floor. She's like, ah! go in the... Obviously, I was in Washington State at the time. However, you know, it is what it is. Surprise. Who didn't see me? Well, I guess technically you didn't see me writing, but by technicalities you saw my writing, so there's that. But yeah, surprise, but not. And so, if like so E equals MC squared, you know, or Elon Musk, again, congratulations. If there was the Sailor Moon crying regarding my saying and my journal log, because, you know, sad, patty, over words. Yeah. So then there's that, because, so then at what point, then you literally have people who literally have nothing better to do with their lives than to just complain. This is true. Make a joke. And so, you know, in that reference, they complained about me telling the truth about my own head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 throughout the state of Texas. Those people complained about me explaining in words that I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. That was their complaints, was that I was explaining it, because I was using words. Not that I had a head injury during basic training. No, why would that make sense for people who are supposed to be intelligent to complain about that? What would be intelligent about complaining about the fact that I had a head injury during basic training in comparison to complaining about me talking about it? I know, you know, from the area Austin that claims they're the smartest in the universe. You know, those college degrees. And so, you know, and then their complaints about how I explained it as best as I could. And so then there are complaints about my words while explaining, and then especially in the time frame of 2009 through 2012, there are complaints because of my pain level spikes. And so, you know, anybody who's ever dealt with pain, and it's a spike of pain, you know, they sometimes use a swear word or two. And so, and of any community, which is the irony of what's supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle community, you know, in the BDSM as well as swinger aspects, you'd think that maybe, just maybe, someone used the words fuck at some point in time. And so each and every time they complained about a pain spike that occurred when I was speaking, you know, I mean, you know, in comparison to, you know, as they complained about my words, not about the fact that I was dealing with what I was dealing with. Why would they ever have humanity or common sense? And so, in this hypothetical, and then, you know, the complaints about how I deal with headaches and how I deal with migraines, not how they, no, because that would be common sense. And then their complaints about my words to make attempts to explain it. Yeah. Then their complaints about my memory deficits, which I didn't understand and still don't understand how those people could complain about my memory deficits, because I'm the one who deals with it. And then their complaints about my cognitive disorders. It's not their cognitive disorders, it's mine. And you'd think, yet again, if they had intelligence as much as they said, that they'd actually be angry at the fact that I had a head injury in basic training because of a drill sergeant that threw me into the metal part of the bomb. Like, they complained about all that other stuff, such as I went from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math, but they didn't complain about the fact that I was thrown into the metal part of a bunk by a drill sergeant. sergeant as a 17-year-old, but they did complain that they thought that I should care about their feelings. And then they were sad because I didn't care about their feelings, about their opinions, as far as my words. So what pattern of behavior in this lecture could I ask in regards of, constitutional rights and freedom of expression and freedom of speech? Because if at that point in time when you think about this in those years, especially from 2009 through 2012, maybe there's a few situations, where those civilian recreational scuba divers should have been more responsible and actually spoke with me in truth. Here's an example that could have been asked. Did you get scuba dive insurance? That would have been an easy question to ask me. However, I brought it up. I had informed my National Geographic open water scuba dive certification instructors that I was going to get insurance. I informed them at that class. I had informed International Scuba that I was going to get it. As far as I was going to get the insurance, the Dan Aware insurance specifically. And so I let everybody know in each one of my scuba dive certification classes. I let the instructors know that I had it as far as the instructor or the Dan Aware or Dan insurance regarding each class. So the other people in the classes, if there were, they asked me about what the difference was regarding the scuba dive insurance. And I told them why I chose the Dan insurance, which was because it covered the hyperbaric chamber just in case. It covered a helicopter medevac flight if needed, no matter where. Almost like a just in case because of the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. But you have to be about life, and you have to actually have genuine care and concern in the correct capacities in comparison to that hypothetical of how people want clout. Instead, but those situations of those people with those complaints, just a year and a half after, that 35 southbound semi-truck collision in comparison, but common sense to that factor, what is humanity at that point to the difference. But the pop culture reference regarding my words, that Sailor Moon crying aspect for that pop culture reference regarding those who don't actually have a with my scuba dive certifications in my logbook as far as my card was concerned. So it was literally right there. So if the supposed claim, as far as certain individuals that I once knew in the scuba diving aspects, well then they would know why they would be considered civilian recreational scuba divers in comparison to responsible and mature, especially with certain needless problems, those types, you know, like my bathing suit does not, there's that 10 commandment factor, those two bathing suits in 2019. No, you're not, it doesn't change the fact that it still broke the 10 commandments. Do not covet what's not yours. Thou shalt not steal. That wasn't out in the open for anybody to take. That was drying so that way I could put it back in my car. But that's known because that's common sense. So no, you weren't invited. No, I don't want to have anything to do with you, as far as the way that obviously has been. Because no, I don't find that in any capacity of being respectful. At all. It's disgraceful, disgusting, and literally, you're literally showing your disrespect to my work. Again, in any water area, you don't have the approval regarding that, no matter how much you wish, because of how the foundation starts. Just as a hypothetical. There is no by proxy. There is non-transferable. Obviously. But you would obviously have to have such a low opinion, because why would you ever think that would be good enough? Or would you think that high of yourself? That you would ever think that would be good enough instead? Goes back to that Sailor Moon reference. As to those tears, just not good enough. You know, when there's no actual reason to ever, I mean, especially as expensive as scuba diving is, what type of levels as to those types of those civilian recreational aspects in comparison? You know what? I think my journal blog for the 1st of May in 2022 might just apply to this video too. So you guys have a good day. Make sure to like my official YouTube videos and subscribe to my official YouTube channel and go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com. Make sure to pay attention to those 10 commandments, especially reread that. That is true. Especially in regards to, well, that murder. And if there's already the points where people have had text messages or emails or phone calls or, you know, posts from online, you know, utilized in the general public sector, you know, just keep that in mind. Congratulations, E equals MC squared. Important for freedom of speech and freedom of expression, constitutional rights. Because how else could you clarify and verify honestly? Because it's the way it is. So, just pointing that out there regarding that Sailor Moon situation. Yeah.
complained about my words when, especially from 2009 through 2012, before complaining as to my books, my copyrights, from my work, from my intellectual property, as to the combination of. You guys have a good day. And remember,